today we're talking a lot about that kind of automated side of penetration testing, and I think that is absolutely key. Now obviously when people are currently doing pen tests, some people don't do it, some people are just doing it once a year. And really what happens in businesses is there's so many changes that are coming in, different systems are getting put in at different times through the year. So that snapshot that you think everything's okay, suddenly it isn't, and you don't really know until the next year. So it's a bit like an MOT in a car, it's really only good for that time when you've actually driven it out of the garage. So I think what we've been doing with Pentera is really kind of working with the customers and sort of showing them how they can do that more regular testing, making sure that they're covering the right areas as well. And I think with a lot of the customers as well, it's really about that skill set as well, making sure that they know how to remediate and how to make sure that they can make those lasting changes to the network. And I think that's a clear distinction to make between Pentera and perhaps a vulnerability scanner, which is just looking at patches, because this isn't just looking at patches, because at the end of the day, Patch Tuesday comes out and you're never ever going to find that every single patch is done. You know what I mean? So this is making lasting changes that are going to really secure, people's environments. And as Kelly mentions, the customers that we're working with, they've got a lot of sensitive data. We work across many different sectors, but the data is all sensitive, and they want something that's going to kind of say, and again, we can expand on this a bit as we go through, but look, if an attacker gets into my network through a phishing attack, which, it's another podcast we're doing, but, if an attacker gets into our network through a different route, how do we stop them escalating, having that lateral movement, and actually being able to stop them causing some pain on our IT network?
So can I ask a question then? You talked about traditionally organisations will have a once a year manual pen test. They'll most likely use a consultancy to support that need.
Yeah.
Where does with deploying something like Pentera, does that negate the need for that manual pen test, or does it complement that manual pen test?
I think there's a couple of answers on that. It depends what you're trying to do. The automated pen testing tool that we use, it runs internally, so you would still have an external test. A lot of places of our customers have replaced their full pen test with it. Some organisations require certain accreditations to happen, and certain governing bodies like CREST or certain accreditations to be of standards. So what they use it for is they still have the tool, but they'll work through it and they'll remediate all the issues, so that when they get their formal pen test, which then really is a tick box exercise, they come in, they run the test, everything's great, they pass and they leave. So it's very much a preparation thing.
So it really reduces the impact.
It does.
That a manual pen test can have on a business when they've identified lots of issues.
Yeah, and the other thing with Pentera is obviously there's a couple of new features coming, which I'm sure we're going to cover later on. But there's obviously, if you're doing a pen test once a year, you need to make sure that those new features are being tested. Like you could have a pen test and a major issue could get released after 6 months, whereas Pentera is updating every 2 weeks, and every quarter you get a major release. I'm sure we're going to cover the fact that they did a lot of improvements around Active Directory testing. They're now doing a lot of new features around testing for ransomware. Again, it's all evolving. It's making sure that you're constantly moving as things are changing.
And I think from my understanding of it is that you've basically got someone there 24/7 giving you a penetration test, where normally you'd only have that done, like you said, once a year. So for when you were using it as a customer, you were able to see things every day, is that right? And you could come in and see a report when you came in of where there was weaknesses and problems and stuff.
Yeah, you can schedule it to run overnight. So, and again, that's another thing. If you have a pen test, they come in on a specific day.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, sometimes people's backup jobs or things that are running overnight are a problem. So you can do your test then. And you can also do, as you say, you can schedule it. You can say, right, we help the customers basically. We do a bit of a baseline with them, and then we scan them kind of key areas of their network, and then we say, right, what do you want your test to look like? And they'll say, right, we're going to do a server VLAN, we're going to do a user one, and you can schedule those to run in.
Can I ask a question though? So I don't know about everyone, like when you get ready for a test, you do preparation, don't you, to try and pass that test?
Good question.
If someone's coming in to do a penetration test, do you generally do a bit of prep so that you know that you're okay? Or is it fair that it is a realistic version of your environment? Because obviously I think a benefit for Pentera is the fact that it is doing it all the time, and when people are making mistakes or having a bad day or a little bit tired, it can happen, right? So I guess there's kind of two levels to it, isn't there? There's the real life and environment, and then there's one that you're probably strategically got a little bit ready for because you knew someone was popping in to attack.
Really good question, actually, because what does happen with a lot of traditional scans are they'll say, right, can you give us one of your Windows machines and one of this machine? And then what happens is they're scanning against the gold image. And we all know that
They haven't got marketings.
I mean, obviously things change, things get installed. You know, a gold image sounds like it is a gold image, but in reality, the advantage of something like Pentera is it's completely clientless, and and it's scanning everything. You know, it's not going to get pulled down a rabbit hole like, you know, a manual pen test. It's going to literally have a look at absolutely everything that's there. Doesn't have a client, and again, I think not having a client is absolutely key. And it obviously follows that. You know, the MITRE ATT&CK framework maps out exactly how an attacker would attack, and it follows that as it goes through. So it's using exactly the same techniques an attacker would use. So literally, if Pentera can't get it, you know, your attacker's going to come on, get on your network, and not going to be able to do it. The other thing you can do with Pentera, obviously, I'm saying it picks up, you know, the patches that have got vulnerabilities against them as a key thing. It then picks up things on the wire, you know, stops you being able to sniff passwords. If there's data that's going unencrypted over the wire, it will tell you about that kind of thing. But you can do targeted tests. Say, look, what happens if I picked up Joe's account or Kelly's account? What could I get to?
Happened. I think I remember rightly when we first started working with you. I think we did a test on that, and we saw how quickly Pentera could access people's passwords and credentials, couldn't we? And that was quite eye-opening how quickly Pentera could get to it. I
mean, it's not unusual for us to have domain admin in 10 minutes.
I wasn't actually saying that out loud, but I didn't realise if I could say that.
I mean, I wouldn't name the people. But
no, I was just going to say, I think I was there and we did it, and it came up pretty quick of how you could get that access to it.
So that would help organisations identify additional challenges or policy weaknesses in terms of password management policies and that type of thing as well.
I mean, a simple one is, like, you have organisations and they have a really good complex password policy, right? Then you might have a service desk that's resetting the password to password with a capital P and a few numbers and a thing, but it's kind of an obvious long password, you know what I mean? And I've had it when service desks are actually when they reset passwords or setting up accounts, they're using the same password. So you can have
not using one times.
No, so you could have two. I've seen it where you've had 200 new accounts that have been created. They all have the same password and they all say user will change on next login. And it just goes like a knife through butter. So they were like, hang on, we need to change our working practices. Yeah. So it's not always that you need to put a bigger password. It can be, you know, and I've seen, obviously one of the key things it picks up is things like nested groups. Now, what a nested group means is you've got a group called Group A and you can see all the people in it. But then you'll see in the middle somewhere there's a Group B. So there's a whole load of group users in Group B that are now a member of Group A. So
that's where they can access things.
Somebody else in IT goes, I want to add somebody into Group B for XYZ, not realising it's in Group A.
Okay.
And I've seen it where we cracked a user's account and all of a sudden they could log on to systems that they should not be logging onto, and the access, I'm not going to say exactly what it was, but the access was unbelievable, and it was literally caused by a nested group that had every single user in the organisation in it. Is
that quite a common issue in terms of how infrastructures are created?
I think because obviously Active Directories they've grown organically. You know, people started with NT4 and then they put their Active Directory servers in about 2000. And things instead of going through and cleaning it all up, things are just going, we need a group here, we'll add this here, that there. And then you end up with a bit of a mess.
I mean, don't you think that's massively happened this year, though? Even more so, of how we've had to accelerate, like, going digital transformation, which we talk about all the time. But now we're all working in different places and things like that. Do you think, actually, things that you probably picked up on Pentera might even be 10 times worse because things had to be done.
And also things, if you're talking about kind of the changes that have been put in to cope with people home working, COVID and that type of things, I mean, projects have been rushed through.
Yeah.
So it's very important to then now to say, okay, we need to just make sure that we've not caused any big issues and then go back and retest. And obviously the beauty of this product is, you know, you're getting all the advanced pen testing tools, which, you know, you can download some. Some of them are proprietary, some of them are, you know, are available, are written by of the internet type thing, but basically Pentera's made them all safe and they're all in a contained platform. And and customers that have seen it, it's anybody can use it. You know what I mean?
Does it apply in cloud as well? So organisations that have migrated from an on-prem environment to a cloud environment, does it help in that circumstance as well in terms of?
I mean, the Pentera itself runs on the infrastructure layer internally. Right, it will test Azure. And it obviously will test, if you've got like a connection out to the cloud and there's an IP address and you can get to it from your environment, yes, it'll test it as part of your network. So
and deployment, you've deployed it as a customer and you obviously support our customers in their deployments. How quickly can you get value from your Pentera deployment?
Well, let's talk about a POC. You know, when we do a POC with a customer, I send them a laptop. We have 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the afternoon, and we've shown the value.
Yeah, it's pretty fast, isn't it?
It's very, very fast. And I think that's been a key thing. I think everything that Core to Cloud has done, you know, you're talking even beyond Pentera, we always make sure that the product is doing all the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
You know, and it's showing you how to fix things. And you basically, we work with the customers as well, but it's very much about making that lasting change and helping focus.
And I think one thing we did mention earlier is that actually it's kind of a plug and go thing, isn't it? It doesn't have too much effect. One thing I've learned, I've always thought that a huge organisation would have an absolutely massive IT team, loads of people on the ground, especially cybersecurity. My lack of understanding until actually working in the industry, and now getting to know us and our customers, and where I first met you, it was like, oh, this is just you guys, and you've got to look after all of this. It's from my understanding, Pentera actually doesn't put too much pressure on your team, or actually alleviate some of that pressure. Would you say that's fair?
Exactly that. I mean, obviously, I think it's especially people are struggling to get cybersecurity specialists because they're so expensive and not available. So a lot of organisations have said, oh, I want to recruit this person. Then they might say, actually, I can't get this person. So what I'm going to do is put tools in place that people can use in my existing team to be able to do the same things effectively, utilising the software. And yeah, something like Pentera is extremely easy. Literally, you're putting in what IP addresses you want to scan and press go.
And from little old me, who's working in the marketing department, I know you test us with Pentera. I've never actually noticed it, or that it's affecting my day-to-day. So it doesn't have much impact on people working when it's running, does it? There's no...
it doesn't. No. Again, it's deploying the payloads, but you don't notice it when you're carrying on with the PCs.
Yep.
And it does a full cleanup at the end of the test as well.
Right.
But for the users themselves don't notice. The only stuff that will notice, which you want to notice, is the existing security you've got. Okay. So the whole point of Pentera, as well as doing what we've talked about so far with that pen test, it's also, testing your endpoint security, testing your network detection and response software. And, if that stuff isn't flagging up, then you've got a problem. Either you've got a blind spot in your network, or something isn't working correctly or isn't configured. So, we do, and also that then leads on to the staff. Are the staff paying any attention to the alerts that are coming in? Because this is a real test. And I know so many people, because they get bombarded, they then just filter it, put it in a folder, never look at it.
I mean, like your emails. Yeah. Where you put everything in CC.
The CC,
yeah. Don't email him with CC.
Yeah.
It just goes into a folder.
It does.
I've learned that the hard way.
Oh, I used to do that all the time.
I know, same. If it's CC'd, it goes into a folder so he doesn't see it. Always in the main and in the body of the email he is in.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can't stand the number of emails you have to have a look at.
That's how he filters the noise.
It's a bit like that. It's a bit like that with the products, though, isn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, we make sure the products that we put in don't generate that noise. So
yes.
For example, like Pentera, as it's called,
formerly
known as CISIS. Pentera, will test. We put in Vectra, and we know that Vectra doesn't generate noise. It just shows you the things that you need to see. And again, that's the whole point of this kind of.
I think that's one thing that I really loved when we came to you and you did the Pentera attack, and we could see it on the Vectra dashboard. Yeah. I think that was the first time. I mean, for me, I don't really understand the tech side, which people will learn more and more, but it was the first time in real time I could see something like a blinking Christmas tree.
How would you know it's working otherwise?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, but very true.
Yeah. So it's a good validation. It's good. It's just as a companion tool to validate technologies that businesses have selected, or if they're going through a refresh. I was just thinking, if businesses are growing as well, or looking at making significant changes to their infrastructure, Pentera can help guide them through the challenges that can bring in terms of, gaps they may create. By making those changes, Pentera can support almost like a companion tool.
So, I mean, to give you an example of that, we've got a customer that's a worldwide customer, and they're based in the UK, but they've got customer sites all around the world.
Oh, yeah.
And what they've done is they've got service providers in those countries, and they had no way of knowing if that service provider is doing what they say they're doing. So they've deployed remote attack nodes on all those locations, and they now can test that service provider, hold them to account, and get them to secure the network. So that's something they've been doing a lot with. And obviously, I know we'll speak to Shaq from CISIS as well, but one of the key things that they're bringing in now is the ability to test ransomware.
You mentioned that. Can you go into a bit more detail?
Yeah, we're actually beta testing this at the moment with 2 of our customers, because obviously what that effectively does is it'll run the kind of the RIAC and the kind of main ransomwares, and it'll go through and you can choose an area, but it'll basically exfiltrate files, it'll try encrypting them. So it will follow the whole ransomware process, and you get to see whether that's going to get protected or not. Again, Shaq can go into a lot of detail on it. It's very new. Again, we're going to work with a lot of our customers when that comes out, and that's a key thing. That's why we've got involved in the POCs and in the kind of early stages, the beta testing.
Okay, so from a marketing person, why is that a really new, sexy feature? If you were telling me in layman's terms, why is that exciting for a customer?
Because I think obviously we've heard about a lot of the attacks in Ireland. There's been a lot of ransomware attacks, that have been going on, and people are putting in all this protection from it effectively. It's trying to stop the intruder getting in. And this is kind of saying, hang on, if they do get in, are the tools going to work? That's the approach, because you have to almost work to the fact that the intruder is going to get in.
Okay, so we're assuming that they're always going to get in now.
I think that's the direction that the business is moving. Prevention's just not a thing now, is it?
Yeah, you still have that perimeter prevention, but you just say, right, okay, when they get in, let's limit what could happen. Protect our systems. Like even simple things, like even by testing this ransomware side, they'll test the software, but it'll make the clients think. For example, do they have an out-of-band backup? Do they have a way that they can get their files back so they're not encrypted?
Yep.
How long is that going to take to restore? What protections can they put in place? So it's kind of that whole story that we can talk around. And I think that as we've been working with the customers, we're talking about ransomware now, but earlier we were talking about nested groups. We've worked with those customers to fix those issues. It's not a case that you've got nested groups, you've got common passwords. There are tools that we can put in that will solve those problems so that they don't happen again. And again, that's a journey we've been on with lots of our customers. I think that you probably should speak to the customers yourselves, and you will on some of these podcasts, but we really are kind of a member of their team effectively.
Yeah.
And we're kind of like guiding them to say, right, do this, and then do this, and right, now you really need to look at this. And that journey, the customers have all been on to trying to secure their environments.
Could you talk to us a little bit about, obviously, when you came to Core to Cloud, what was the issue and the pain point, and why were you looking for something different? What that wasn't helping you at the time?
You're talking about Pantera at Bolton?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, obviously, the way it worked is we had Vectra at Bolton, and that network detection response tool, which, my boss and CTO at the time, we were like, right, we really need something that's going to give us that visibility, because we just didn't know what we didn't know effectively. So we put Vectra in, and we're like, fantastic. Now we feel that something unusual is going on. We can see it. And then it came up, we're like, right, okay, great. So how do we know it's working? And that conversation came out, and obviously we wanted a tool that was going to just effectively do exactly what an attacker was going to do on our network, and fire that off. So that's what happened. We did that to see how it would look in Vectra. So that scan was run. We could see it attacking you could see it going up the quadrants in Vectra.
I was going to say that's the cool bit that I like.
Vectra starts off bottom left, and it goes up to top right if there's a real issue. So obviously that's kind of what happened. Within seconds, it was kind of going up in that top right quadrant and firing off.
Yeah.
And obviously within Pantera, you've got various options of stealthiness as well, which we can try.
How hard it goes in.
Yeah, so basically what that means is if you put it on aggressive mode, simplistically, it'll just scan every single port, right? Okay. If you put it on quiet mode, it'll just pick a few key ports, do it quietly. So again, we could see and sort of help tune our other products effectively. So we did that, and then obviously on the back of that, we then looked at the results coming out of CISIS, and we at the time, now known as Pantera, and we looked at that and went, hang on, there's some real fundamental issues here that we need to fix. And things that we weren't necessarily aware of that come out. Some things have come out of pen tests before, but when you get a pen test done manually, they don't always tell you how to fix it. Whereas Pantera,
okay, so I didn't realise that. So when they come, they don't tell you how to fix once after. They don't do like a best practice.
They sometimes give you a link or something, but it's vague. Whereas what Pantera did is it said, right, these are the changes to make, and we just were like, right, okay, and we picked a few key things, started fixing them, and we could see that when we were rerunning Pantera, the difference it was making. Right. And the amount of time it was taking to sort of get that foothold and move forward. So we kind of did that, and then obviously on the back of that, we then looked at another product to kind of do the remediation. It was flagging up around passwords.
Yep.
So we put a product in that got rid of all the common passwords. It got rid of all the nested groups. So we were making those changes alongside Pantera. So
Pantera kind of gave you a project plan of then what you needed to fix and what you needed to do next.
It basically tested everything we had. Made my staff at the time make sure they were looking at the alerts, and it then also helped with that remediation side of things. So we were kind of comfortable that it was achievable remediation. I think that's the right way of putting it. And I kind of mentioned this a bit earlier on that, if you do a scanning tool, it'll just show you've got 1 million patches missing, and depending what day you run it, you'll fix it all, and the next day there'll be another load of patches.
Yeah.
Whereas Pantera kind of works in a different way, don't you think, Shaq? It kind of really focuses what it shows you.
It's really interesting because I don't think I've heard that story of, that sort of origin story where you started with Pantera or CISIS at the time. So it'd be really interesting to look at that report or, how things look, further down the road. But you're right, when you do manual pen testing, the thing is just getting consistency. And if you're doing it, all the time. It depends on the skill set of the person that's running the test, what they're looking for. And when you're automating these kind of things, it's really, there's always the same sort of game plan, really. We're going to go in, we're going to find what's live on the network on that given day, and then go after, I guess, the most advantageous attack vector and say, we can find these vulnerabilities to exploit. There is a bit of manual input in terms of like a semi-automated fashion where you can drive certain attack vectors and say, well, this looks interesting. What happens if I exploit this particular server or endpoint? Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think the key thing is that consistency, right? And that remediation work is about sort of prioritizing what's really important, what you can fix really easily, mm-hmm. As opposed to having, I guess, a massive list of different things that you could go in different directions to fix. If
you get a massive list, it tends that they won't do any of it.
Well, yeah, and sometimes,
That's true though, of anyone,
that
isn't it? If you have a massive list on your table to do this, you're not
going
to do it.
Start with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think the other aspect of that is that if you're doing it once a year, it's like, well,
the list is going to be huge,
we'll get round to that at some point, and then most of the time we find that people just never get round to even doing any of it, and it's like, well, it's kind of time for the annual pen test again. And what do we do? Sometimes it depends, right, on sort of how focused people are, and like you said, it's that motivation of trying to tackle a big list of things to do on top of everything else.
Yeah.
What other tools are available? Because Pantera seems to stand alone in terms of the capability that they have. What would businesses do previously? Is it more vulnerability scanning that organisations tend to do if they're owning?
I'm sure Shaq's
part of that process.
Shaq's opinion, but yeah, I would say it's more vulnerability scanning or testing a gold image, rather than this more wide approach, clientless.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Would you have to do more manual tests a year then? Is that what we're saying, or?
It really varies, and I think it depends on what people know and the skill set that they have in-house, as well as bringing in skill sets from external parties. And I would say it varies, right, from the very simple doing a vulnerability scan and let's patch things. I think there's always a mandate to say we need to be patched and updated, but it's going beyond that, right? What's the consequences of not patching a particular system? And I think that becomes really important. Because it's now more contextual. It's based on your environment, what we see that we can exploit. So the analogy I always give is like, from a vulnerability perspective, you see an open window, right? You want to close that window, but ultimately, from Pantera, when we see that window, we then show the consequences of what that open window means, how somebody can then break into the house and do whatever. And we actually sort of help people visualize that through an attack vector to show here's a vulnerability and this is how we've moved through that chain to run the exploit.
And I was going to say that's expanding out now, isn't it? Because you guys are moving into sort of doing some more ransomware tests as well.
Yeah, we touched on this earlier. So we know there's some new exciting stuff going on with the ransomware stuff piece. Would you happy to go into that in a bit more detail?
Yeah, sure. So we call it ransomware ready. It's based on, as a lot of things that we see in the news around ransomware attacks, and it's sort of top of mind and quite important that you're able to test what your capability is against a given ransomware attack, and nobody really has that ability, to do that. So with Pantera, we've introduced the concept of emulating a particular family of ransomware, usually the ones that we see in the news like REvil, WannaCry previously from 2017, but some of the newer families and some of the newer variants that we're seeing crop up now. And it's really being able to effectively use the same techniques that we see with ransomware in terms of encrypting files. And usually ransomware always goes after the data, so we're talking about documents, critical user data that once it's encrypted, it's kind of gone. So we sort of replicate that same technique to encrypt files, and on the other side, from a defensive sort of aspect, it's how does our EDR or endpoint solution react or behave. So it's really about stress testing your sort of endpoint controls, whether it's on servers, whether it's on endpoints, to see what detection capability they have, and potentially response capability as well. So how can they then stop us from being able to encrypt those files?
It gets to give you a practice dry run.
Effectively, yeah. So
I think that you probably find that if you ask most customers, do you think your endpoint security will stop ransomware? They'd all look at you blankly and go, I'm not sure.
Well, you're not going to know until you've been attacked, right?
Yeah.
Normally.
Yeah, and it's interesting because listening to this CEO in response to Kaseya, he was talking about, with his conversations with FireEye, he was talking about it's not, a matter of if you'll get attacked, but it's when, right? So we know it's a matter of time, and it's like, what is the fallout of a given attack? And it's trying to really sort of replicate that to say, what would happen, right? It's that visibility of, do we have the right controls in place to be able to block it, and how far would it go? What ultimately are the consequences? And it's kind of then being able to sort of, I guess, devise a playbook, a plan, an action plan that allows you to work on all of the sort of, I guess, in terms of that sort of security stack and your response detection capability, your alert processes. How do they behave? Because it's not just about let's say your EDR or endpoint solution, but it's also about people. It's about, when we detect it, what happens? Interesting use cases are like, you might have Defender or ATP alerts that are forwarded to an SMS service. So if somebody is out of the office, when you see a detection, you get a message on your phone and think, oh, okay, this might be the start of something interesting and perhaps I need to dig into it. So you're able to sort of test those kind of processes as well.
And help reduce that attack surface footprint effectively. So that, there's a lot less to go at effectively by making those changes.
That's really important. It goes back to that sort of fallout. If we can reduce that attack surface and minimize it, so at least it's isolated to one system, one box, and we've then detected it and blocked it. Great, right? Because then the worst thing that can happen is these things move laterally across a network, especially when there is somebody orchestrating the attack on the other side. They're then looking for interesting things to go after. Can we find the crown jewels? Yeah. Go after the servers, get the big important files or data. Yeah, I guess that there's a tipping point when there are businesses. Perhaps the consequences of an attack is that they go out of business, or people lose their jobs or whatever. And I guess there is a human element as well and that's that tipping point when we see people's lives being affected in that way. And I think healthcare is probably a good example of that. When you have downtime with systems, then people sort of take it more seriously. And and I think we've sort of reached that tipping point where everybody knows or heard about ransomware attacks or I guess cyber attacks, and ultimately the consequences of those kind of things.
Yeah, definitely.
It's definitely prevalent in healthcare, isn't it, in terms of it's an industry that's or has previously been understood to have legacy, older networks, older systems. Certainly there's been a big investment, hasn't there, in NHS, particularly in the last sort of 5 years, 6 years, where there's more percentage of budget being spent on cyber specifically. So that's, we obviously do a lot of work in healthcare.
Yeah, we do. I mean, as you say, there's, the value of healthcare data is huge.
Yeah.
And we've often seen sort of like malware being written specifically against specific medical devices to try and get that data off. So again, it's having that kind of those tools in place to make sure that you're staying one step ahead effectively, isn't it? And I think it's all part of a kind of an ecosystem. It's not just one thing that you have to do. It's all part and parcel. It all works together to kind of give you that security and understanding and visibility of your weak points before they're exploited effectively. And as we know, I think, it's something I've sort of talked about at other times, that an attacker often just sits in your network for a long time before they necessarily, pull that trigger.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've got the tools that give you the visibility. Pantera gives you the kind of, work on that, reduce what they can do when they do pull that trigger. You know what I mean? So again, it's all part of the kind of the key things to work on.
So quite often, you can have an executable or something that's been put on the network, somehow got on there, it's been dormant for 18 months, and Pantera can find that and exploit it to see what the consequences of that would be.
Finding it's more the visibility side. Pantera will more show you what will happen when it
does execute.
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, so if you think of it, we are now behaving like the attacker. So that executable would come from us, and we can. I think you talked about the stealthiness level. So how noisy are we when we go into a network? We can be very noisy on one side of the scale, towards the left side of the scale, and then there are controls that might pick those things up. There's like network monitoring tools and things. Oh, okay, there's some unusual activity. What's going on? And it's designed to stress test those kind of controls and see if they pick us up. So it's more, you're kind of marking your own homework, and you've got, on the other side of the scale, we can be very stealthy, and perhaps over a longer period of time, drop an executable and then do something with it, and then so on and so forth. So it's then, where's that sort of point in that scale of how much noise we make that your controls pick us up effectively?
I don't think I've ever been to a hospital and never thought that I wouldn't be able to be treated because they might have been cyber attacked. I don't think that's ever come through my head. Like, you have the thoughts of like they might not be.
Ironically, though, we don't really talk about WannaCry anymore, but ironically, at that time, a lot of hospitals, even though it was in the news, a lot of hospitals were not affected, right?
Yeah.
But even the ones that weren't affected still pull things off the network to make sure they weren't affected.
Right.
Like if they had 2 analyzers, they might pull one of them off until they worked out what was going on. So even when
Just
they
to
weren't
protect
affected,
themselves.
patient care could be affected because of that. Try to put that resilience in case there's a problem. So it's constant.
They had that in Ireland, didn't they? They shut down the entire
Yeah.
health system, so that had an impact on surgeries. And
I just don't think me as a day-to-day person would have ever thought, I need to go to hospital today. And that may not be, you may not be able to get the full treatment or access to everything, or things might be delayed because of cyber. I don't think forefront of everyone's mind, really.
If you think about it in the past, the way hospital, I'm not an expert, but the way that hospitals used to work, everything was on paper, you discharge on paper, These days, they're all putting electronic patient records in.
Yeah.
So the whole process of moving patients, prescribing medicines is all electronic.
yeah, even getting blood and that sort of thing is all electronically connected to the patient.
Well,
and
the bridges,
systems.
the fridges
doors,
are,
the
Yeah,
fridges
yeah,
wouldn't
when
even
you're saying
open
that.
so that could have an impact if that was that system was compromised.
It's more and more key, and obviously, if those systems go offline, if you think about the amount of data that's going through, there's only a certain amount of time that you can go with it off before you really can't get all that data back in.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Like if they're running on paper, you say running up, I'm not don't know the exact times, but if you're running paper for half an hour, you might then say, right, somebody please input that data and get us back up. If they're running for hours and hours, they'll just go, right.
Just write it off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then obviously things are out of sync because obviously if you're prescribing medicines, that's then going to be auto-ordering that medicine again. And if you've started to prescribe on paper, your stock levels are wrong, so you've got to adjust your stock levels. You know what I mean? So it's all very efficient, but you've got to make sure you're keeping these systems safe.
So, and I guess, Phil's sort of seen this as well around things like password hygiene.
Yeah.
That comes up a lot. And it's crazy the amount of times we see
Password 123.
admins,
Exclamation mark's good though, isn't it?
I would say privileged accounts. Right?
They're often the worst, the privileged ones.
Privileged accounts. So, I don't want to be a part of this policy. Or I guess even if we go back to legacy systems, right? That they're very sensitive to, I guess, sort of management and update and things like that, and trying to get access to them. So it's always, we want easy access, and then that becomes an attack vector, or let's say a vulnerability in that an attacker is going to go after those systems and find those weak passwords, and then they've got now some sort of admin level access or system level access. That the consequences of that is then that you've got a breached network. So any kind of compromised system where somebody's able to then grab those credentials, they can move across the network and do whatever they want. So I would say we see that a lot. We see and there's got to be, I guess, at some point some change in the way people look at passwords, and there is, I guess, long-term sort of conversations around how identity and profiles and passwords are managed.
We've done a lot of work with that. A lot of police we work with are now going for ephemeral accounts, so they don't have the admins and they only give them when they're needed. Things like tap logins, getting rid of passwords, single sign-on, so they don't have passwords. And I think we were talking earlier about when places get hacked. I mean, one thing that I've commented on before is that, for example, if website X gets hacked and they've used if I've used my Core to Cloud email address with that account and a password, if I'm using that password somewhere else, they may have hacked that site, but they might go and try that username and password on 10 other sites. And if you're using a common password, all of a sudden one turns into 10.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's a very common technique, once, like you said, and then it's endless, really, as to what people can do if they've got access. They've been able to perhaps compromise your work system, but then they've been able to move onto your Facebook account, onto your Gmail account. And if you think of all of the different things that you use, and what data and what information you've got on there, that's all gold.
Okay, so from for me, I'm like, I've got a Facebook account. There's nothing really that exciting on it. Why is that really bad that someone could get on my Facebook account?
It's all your personal data, your pictures, isn't it? I mean, you don't necessarily want your pictures of your kids getting out, or you don't necessarily want people taking pictures off your Facebook.
Yeah. They could use it for impersonation as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. I mean, you could have like date of birth. Like you might have your date of birth on there. That's all part of your data that you then, your bank asks for specific questions. It could be, where were you Where were you born? Yeah. What was your date of birth?
Yeah.
Hang on,
so they're
I could probably figure that out. What's the name of your dog? Probably on there.
So they're making a profile of me. Yeah.
It's that whole reconnaissance piece, right? And that's where attackers start to build up that sort of, I guess, information about you, and especially high value targets. Then it becomes like, okay, where do they live? Where can we, or potentially then they're looking at your work, your home.
You do things really innocently, don't you? Because I can think about a time when my cousin, she moved into a new house, so she took a picture outside the house, which actually had the number and then the street of the cul-de-sac. Yep. And then that week she took pictures of like all the new stuff that was arriving, like the TV, and I'm really excited and da-da-da. And then 3 weeks later, she posted that she was on holiday. Oh. And I remember texting her saying, I probably wouldn't tag that you're on holiday. And she's like, what are you on about? And I was like, well, 3 weeks prior, you put where you were, your cul-de-sac, the number. You also said all the pictures of your new sofa, your TV, and now you've told no one that you're not there. And she was like, oh God, I hadn't thought about that. And her profile at the time, I think, was public. This is like a few years back. But I don't think you think of really innocent highlights of your life that you want to share with people can be basically a big old, hello.
It can be as simple as you're out of office. Think about it, you go on holiday, you put an out of office.
I hadn't even thought of that.
It sends externally going out, I am away from the office now for 2 weeks. People are going, oh, this person's on holiday.
Yeah.
I mean, these are simple things. I mean, again, you got the computer side of things and the controls, which we're talking about. There's always the user side. You need to, train the users. And I think something like Pentera that actually kind of goes, look, this is what I've managed to do, has that impact for people to actually think. So, if you say you're vulnerable to this, you go, nah, I don't care.
Yeah.
If you say, and we've managed to do this, this, and this on the back of it, that people go, okay, wait a minute.
That's what makes it real, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that's when I saw CISIS work for the first time. I was like, oh.
Pentera.
Oh, sorry. Formerly CISIS.
We're still getting used to it.
But I said it right,
yeah,
didn't I? So it's okay.
It's fine.
I didn't call it Pisces or anything. But yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? When you actually see the effect and what it could do, it makes it more real for everybody.
Yeah, I think it goes back to something that Phil mentioned earlier. It's that visibility. Sometimes people just don't know what's out there. And just in terms of your estate, what does your estate look like? What systems are, I guess, around or available at a given time? So if we were to test early in the morning, we may see different users, different systems. So that visibility becomes important just to try and understand what does the landscape look like. And then even from an OS perspective, do we have any legacy systems? The really basics, really. And sometimes people don't have even that kind of visibility, so that becomes important.
Can you see, is there like silly things like human behaviour of how do we make errors maybe later on in the week or by the afternoon or stuff? Can you start seeing things like that of human error? Does that, can you start seeing patterns of...
Obviously, if somebody's made something more open than it was before, it would come up.
Right.
If it depends on the change. I think one thing I was just thinking when Shaq was talking as well, a couple of advantages of Pentera, two things to mention really. One is that it's really easy to upgrade now. So you're getting the latest tools by just pressing one upgrade button.
Okay.
The second one is that when we're talking about visibility, there's a really easy way now of, because we talked about previously about a large customer we had around the world and they've got the permanent remote attack nodes. You can now do dynamic attack nodes within Pentera, and what that means is literally you click a button, you say a Windows machine in a different part of your network, and it can use that machine to sniff all the traffic. So previously, for example, you might have to move your Pentera device or change where it's connected.
Oh, yes.
So, for example, I'm up in Preston. Let's use that as an example. But, I could then select my machine in our office up there, and then use that machine to sniff all the traffic up in that area.
That's a really helpful change.
So it's very easy to then get that visibility.
Yeah, so that is the whole piece around scaling across your whole net estate, right? And like you said, you could be in Preston, and then you've got to take your laptop, and you're coming, down to Oxford or wherever. It's time, right? And it's resources as well. And I think that's the important thing, especially when you're stretched as an IT team and you have, or a security team, or you're, a one-man band. How do you manage all of the other sort of pressures, on the business and the workload and all of those things? It really just helps in terms of having a platform where you can hit go or hit run, and it will go off and start doing the reconnaissance piece, all of the attack vectors and the things that we talked about, and find those things. And you go back and you just look at the output. So you at the end of that process, you pick up the output and say, well, here's 1, 2, 3 in terms of like the critical things that I need to go and fix. This is how to fix them. You go and fix them, and then let's say a week later, the same scan runs because it's been set on a schedule now.
Yep.
And you get the same output again, and you compare it against last week. So you've got this sort of trend analysis over time of being able to look at your estate and get to a point where you're getting that resilience, that improvement,
and if
in your security posture.
And if something new drops in that's going to knock the score down again, at least you'll know about it.
Yeah.
Not wait a whole 12 months.
Yeah.
I guess this is, it's the automation, isn't it? It's key, and that's how the automation really helps us with Pentera, to be able to consistently and continuously test.
Yeah.
What other trends have you seen? You mentioned passwords.
Yeah, but so passwords is a big one. I think these days people are pretty good at patching systems, I find. Occasionally you'll have the odd system on a network that for whatever reason hasn't been touched because it's owned by a third-party vendor, and it's kind of there's a grey line as to who patches it or who updates it, or you can't update it because it's being managed by an external entity. So then getting that visibility that this system needs to be updated, it's patched. We've seen systems that are still vulnerable to WannaCry. We're 2021, and that was 2017.
Wow.
Yeah. It's one that gets missed. It does happen.
And it's usually the odd system, right? And like we said, it's that kind of scenario where there's a grey line, there's a grey area, as to whose responsibility it is. And
even if you've got really hard and well-controlled systems, it just takes one weak link, and that's your routing.
Yeah.
And that's it. It goes back to that scaling across your estate. Nobody has the time to and especially when you talk about, I guess, it could be an internal tester, it could be an external. You need a full-time resource to go around and continuously test all of these different systems.
And that's the really great thing about it, isn't it? Is that you don't need
a
huge resource.
Yeah.
Which we touched on earlier, that people don't have huge teams. I think that was one of the most shocking things when I first went to Bolton. Yeah. I just assumed, because a hospital's quite huge, that a team would match that. And to go in and see, like, I don't know what I imagined. I just imagined Willy Wonka factory, but of cybersecurity people. But it wasn't. It was like just a small team, and you just think, oh gosh, you've got to look after all these elements and all these cogs. It's quite unreal. And to learn now, the longer I've been in this industry, that's not just healthcare. Yeah. Like when we do case studies, and they're like, oh no, it's just me and this guy, and we do the whole the world.
That surprised me actually when I started speaking to people outside the NHS. Yeah. Sometimes they've even got a smaller team. And
I know.
Really, it's surprising.
I know. Really surprising how small teams are.
Yeah, and there's so much to do, right? And
it's not just cyber, is it? It's all the business applications and workflows, and you
need your software
business as usual.
You need your software to work for you, don't you? Ultimately.
Yeah, that's key to Pentera, isn't it? With the automation.
I was just thinking about the use cases. There's so many different sort of, I guess, customer profiles in who uses Pentera. Right? We talked about healthcare, but then we talk about I guess larger enterprises that have dedicated teams that are doing these kind of things, day in, day out, and even they love the pain that we take away with automating a lot of this stuff. Yeah. I think we've had a couple of customers where we've talked about that aspect of doing the testing manually, but then spending the evenings writing out the reports, right, on the findings.
Right.
Whereas, as soon as the test runs, you get that output. get the findings straight away. It's not a case of then somebody having to understand all of the data and interpret the data.
Taking away all
really
the
good.
homework.